My name is Zephyr, and I used to think the universe had a sense of humor. Turns out it has a twisted sense of irony instead. I'm what you might call a communications officer for the Luminary Coalition. Though that title sounds way more impressive than sitting in a dimly lit booth for 12 hours a day, translating alien complaints about shipping delays and diplomatic lunch menus. We're a peaceful species, you see. So peaceful that our idea of conflict resolution involves lengthy meditation sessions and herbal tea, which made it particularly awkward when the Ravagers showed up at our doorstep with the galactic equivalent of a eviction notice written in plasma fire. The Ravagers, for those lucky enough to never encounter them, are basically what happens when someone takes every nightmare about alien invaders and cranks it up to 11. They don't just conquer planets, they strip mine entire solar systems for resources, leaving behind nothing but cosmic debris and really depressing space dust. Their diplomatic strategy consists of two options: surrender immediately, or surrender after they've reduced your homeworld to its component atoms. Guess which option they offered us? So there I was, 3 weeks ago, staring at my communications array with the kind of existential dread usually reserved for tax audits. My supervisor, a perpetually anxious luminary named Flux, was practically vibrating with panic as he handed me the transmission code. "Send distress calls to everyone," he said, his bioluminescent patches flickering like a broken disco ball. "The Council of Elders has authorized emergency protocols. Contact every major civilization in our sector." Everyone. Right, because when you're facing extinction, you might as well humiliate yourself on a galactic scale. First, I contacted the Zenthari Empire. Their response came back in approximately 37 seconds. The Zenthari Empire regrets that current military commitments prevent assistance at this time. "Have you considered negotiating?" "Negotiating? With planet-eating monsters? Sure. Let me just ask them nicely to not vaporize my homeworld." Next up, the Crystalline Confederacy. Their reply was even more helpful. "Our seers have consulted the probability matrices. The likelihood of successful intervention is 0.0003%. We wish you a peaceful transition to the next plane of existence." Thanks. Really feeling the galactic solidarity there. The Void Collective sent back a form letter, an actual form letter. It had a checkbox for regretfully declining due to, and someone had marked philosophical differences with the concept of intervention. 12 more civilizations, 12 more variations of good luck with that whole extinction thing. The excuses ranged from budget constraints to Mercury is in retrograde, to my personal favorite, our military is currently undergoing sensitivity training. I was about to give up and start updating my resume for whatever jobs exist in the afterlife when a response pinged in from a sector I'd almost forgotten about. The message was short, direct, and completely unprecedented. "Received your distress call, en route, ETA 72 hours. Try not to die before we get there. Captain Murphy, Terran Defense Fleet." I stared at the message for a full minute. Terrans. Humans. The species most of the galaxy considered barely more advanced than the fungal networks on Epsilon Prime. They were coming to help us. Either the universe had finally developed that sense of humor I mentioned, or we were about to witness the shortest rescue attempt in galactic history. 71 hours and 43 minutes later they arrived. And let me tell you, nothing could have prepared me for my first glimpse of the human rescue fleet. I was expecting sleek warships, maybe some imposing dreadnoughts like the ones you see in those recruitment holos the Zenthari Empire puts out. What I got instead looked like someone had raided a cosmic junkyard and decided to call it a day. The flagship appeared to be held together with what humans apparently call hope, prayers, and structural integrity fields on their last warranty cycle. The ship that docked with our station was called the Defiant Optimism, which should have been my first clue about human psychology. It was a patchwork of mismatched hull plating, jury-rigged weapon systems, and what appeared to be decorative flame decals along the sides. Because apparently when facing galactic extinction, humans worry about aesthetics. Captain Jake Murphy was the first to step through the airlock, and I immediately understood why his species had survived long enough to develop space travel. He was built like someone who had personally wrestled every challenge life had thrown at him and won most of the matches. His uniform was regulation, if you ignored the coffee stains, the unauthorized patches, and the fact that he was wearing combat boots that had clearly seen more action than most entire fleets. "You must be Zephyr," he said, extending a hand in that peculiar human greeting gesture. "Murph, thanks for not getting yourselves extinct before we showed up." His grip could have crushed synthetic diamonds. I decided not to mention this. "Captain, I must express our gratitude, but I should inform you that the Ravagers have a force of approximately 300 vessels, each capable of reducing a small moon to constituent particles. Our defensive capabilities are limited." Murphy grinned. It was the kind of expression that suggested either supreme confidence or complete insanity. Possibly both. 300? Hell, that's practically a fair fight. "Rodriguez, get over here and meet our new friend." Engineer Rosie Rodriguez bounded through the airlock like someone had injected her with liquid enthusiasm. She was smaller than Murphy but radiated the kind of manic energy usually associated with unstable reactor cores. Her tool belt contained what appeared to be every piece of mechanical equipment ever invented, plus several items I couldn't identify but strongly suspected were held together with that adhesive tape. Humans seemed to worship. "Ooh, Luminari tech," she said, immediately gravitating toward our communication array. "Mind if I take a look? I bet I can boost your signal range by at least 40% with some creative rewiring and maybe a caffeine-powered amplification matrix." Before I could object, she had already opened an access panel and was elbowed deep in our most sensitive equipment. "Rodriguez," I began carefully, "that system took our engineers 3 years to calibrate properly." "Yeah, I can see the problem," she said, not looking up. "You guys over-engineered everything. Too much precision, not enough creative chaos. Hand me that quantum spanner, would you?" The third human through the airlock was Commander Stone, their tactical officer. If Murphy was confidence and Rodriguez was chaos, Stone was the kind of calm that suggested he had seen everything the universe had to offer and found most of it mildly disappointing. He nodded politely and immediately began studying our defensive schematics with the focused intensity of someone planning to rearrange furniture rather than prevent planetary genocide. "Interesting setup," he said after a moment. "Your shield generators are positioned for maximum coverage, minimal redundancy. Very logical, completely predictable. The Ravagers will punch through them in approximately 17 minutes. My bioluminescent patches dimmed with despair. We know our defenses are inadequate. That's why we called for help. Though I should mention, every other civilization in our sector has declined to assist, citing various practical and philosophical objections to suicide missions." Murphy's grin widened. "Good thing we're not every other civilization. Stone, what do you think? Can we work with this?" Stone studied the tactical display for another moment, then looked up with what might have been the ghost of a smile. "It'll be challenging, suicidal even. The kind of odds that would make a smart species pack up and find a nice uninhabited system to colonize." "Perfect," Murphy said. "Rodriguez, how long do you need to work your magic on their systems?" "Give me 6 hours and access to their industrial replicators. Also coffee. Lots of coffee. And maybe some of that duct tape I saw in Storage Bay 7. I stared at them. "You're actually planning to fight? Against 300 Ravager vessels? With a fleet of—" I counted quickly through the airlock viewport. 7 ships? 12 ships, Murphy corrected. "The other 5 are running silent on the far side of your moon. And yeah, we're planning to fight. It's kind of what we do, but the odds are mathematically impossible. Even with your assistance, we cannot hope to achieve victory." Murphy exchanged a look with his crew, and I caught something in their expressions that I couldn't quite identify at the time. Later I would recognize it as the fundamental difference between humans and every other species in the galaxy. "Kid," Murphy said, "we didn't come here because we thought we could win. We came because you asked for help, and nobody else showed up." Stone nodded. "Besides, impossible odds just make it more interesting. Any species can win a fair fight." Rodriguez looked up from our communications array, her face streaked with lubricant and wearing a grin that belonged in a medical textbook under dangerous levels of optimism. "Plus, we've got secret weapons. Human ingenuity, spite, and approximately 4,000 years of experience telling the universe to go stuff itself." I realized standing there in my communications booth, watching these 3 humans prepare to throw themselves against impossible odds for a species they'd never met, that perhaps I had been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't whether they could win, it was whether they would try. The next 18 hours were a masterclass in how 2 completely different species could drive each other to the brink of nervous breakdowns while somehow managing to prepare for war. It started with Rodriguez's improvements to our communication system. I use the term improvements loosely, because what she actually did was strip out half our precision-calibrated components and replace them with what appeared to be spare parts from a food processor. 3 meters of that mystical human duct tape, and something she called a flux capacitor, that I'm 90% certain she made up on the spot. "Trust me," she said, wielding a plasma torch with the casual confidence of someone who had never met a piece of technology she couldn't befriend or intimidate into cooperation. "Your people designed this thing like it was going to be displayed in a museum. All form, no function. We're going for maximum efficiency here." The result looked like a technical disaster. It also boosted our signal range by 63% and somehow made our morning coffee taste better. I stopped questioning human engineering after that. Meanwhile, Commander Stone had taken it upon himself to train our defense volunteers in what he generously called basic combat tactics. This involved gathering 24 of our most peaceful citizens in the station's main cargo bay, and teaching them how to fight using references that made absolutely no sense to anyone with normal brain chemistry. "Think of this as the Battle of Thermopylae," he told a group of confused Luminari holding makeshift weapons. "Except instead of 300 Spartans, we've got 12 humans and whatever passes for righteous anger in your species. The principles are the same, Hold the line, trust your teammates, and remember that the enemy bleeds just like you do. One of our volunteers, a botanist named Prism, whose previous combat experience consisted entirely of aggressive pruning, raised a tentacle. Commander Stone, what is a Spartan? Ancient human warriors who decided that dying gloriously was preferable to living quietly. They held off an entire army at a narrow pass using nothing but bronze weapons. Superior tactics and the kind of stubbornness that makes quantum mechanics look flexible. Another volunteer, our head librarian, asked, "Did they win?" "They died to the last man," Stone replied cheerfully. "But they bought time for their allies to mount a proper defense, and the story inspired humans for the next 2.5 millennia. Sometimes the real victory isn't surviving the battle, it's making sure your sacrifice means something." I watched this exchange from the observation deck, my bioluminescent patches flickering in what I can only describe as existential confusion. In Luminari culture, we celebrated stories of negotiation, compromise, and peaceful resolution. Humans apparently told bedtime stories about glorious last stands and the tactical advantages of spite. Captain Murphy found me there an hour later, staring out at the void where the Ravager fleet would soon emerge from hyperspace. He was carrying 2 cups of that liquid stimulant humans consumed in quantities that should have been lethal to most carbon-based lifeforms. "Coffee?" he offered. "Rodriguez swears this batch won't dissolve your stomach lining." I accepted the cup cautiously. It tasted like concentrated determination with notes of barely controlled chaos. "Captain, I must ask, why are your people so comfortable with the concept of hopeless battle?" Murphy considered this while taking a sip that would have powered our communications array for a week. "You know what the difference is between humans and most other species. Most folks look at a problem and calculate the odds of success. We look at a problem and calculate the cost of giving up. But surely there must be limits to what you'll attempt. Mathematical certainties that even humans won't challenge. Kid, we're a species that figured out how to fly by watching birds and thinking we should be able to do that too. We split atoms because we were curious what was inside. We went to our moon because it was there, and we went to other stars because our moon got boring. The universe keeps telling us something's impossible, and we keep taking that as a personal challenge." Down in the cargo bay, Stone was now teaching our volunteers something called the Alamo defense, which apparently involved holding a position until everyone was dead but making the enemy pay so heavily for the victory that they'd think twice before trying it again. Our botanist was taking notes. "This seems like a very inefficient approach to conflict resolution," I observed. Murphy's laugh was the sound of someone who had heard that criticism before. "Efficient? Hell no. Effective? Depends how you measure success. See, most species think the goal of combat is to win with minimal losses. We figured out a long time ago that sometimes the goal is to make the other guy quit, and there's a big difference between those two strategies." As if to emphasize his point, Rodriguez's voice echoed through the station's communication system. "Attention all organic and semi-organic lifeforms. Please clear the main engineering deck. I'm about to attempt something that violates at least 3 laws of physics and possibly 1 cosmic ordinance. If successful, we'll have enough firepower to make the Ravagers think twice. If unsuccessful, well, at least the explosion will be visible from the next star system." "Should we be concerned?" I asked. "Probably," Murphy admitted. "But Rodriguez has been violating the laws of physics professionally for 15 years. And we're all still here. Besides, conventional tactics aren't going to work against 300 enemy ships. Sometimes you need to try something so crazy that the universe itself does a double take." That's when the proximity alarm started screaming. The Ravager Advanced Scout had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of our system, 3 hours ahead of schedule, naturally, because nothing in this crisis could go according to plan. Murphy drained his coffee in one gulp and started walking toward the command center. "Showtime, people. Rodriguez, please tell me whatever you're doing down there is at least marginally functional." "Define functional," came the reply over the comm. "Will it shoot things when we point it at them?" "Oh, absolutely. It might also shoot things when we don't point it at them. But that's just a feature, not a bug. I call it the element of surprise." I followed Murphy to the command center, where Stone was already coordinating with the human fleet. Through the viewport I could see their ships moving into formation, and I had to admit that despite their jury-rigged appearance, they moved with the kind of precision that spoke of crews who had worked together through more impossible situations than anyone had a right to survive. "Fleet status report," Murphy called out. "All ships report ready for combat operations," Stone replied. "Ammunition stores at maximum, crew morale somewhere between confident and clinically insane, and Rodriguez's mystery weapon is apparently powered up and making ominous humming sound." "Outstanding. What's our tactical situation?" "1 Ravager scout ship, probably calling in the main fleet as we speak. Standard doctrine would be to eliminate the scout before it can report back." Murphy nodded. "Any chance we can pull that off without revealing our full capability? With conventional weapons? Not likely. But Rodriguez did mention something about a testing opportunity." That's when the station shuddered, and every light dimmed for exactly 3 seconds. When they came back up, Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm with barely contained excitement. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted alien lifeforms, I am pleased to announce that Project Absolutely Terrible Idea has achieved initial success. The scout ship is no longer a problem, neither is that small asteroid that happened to be in the general vicinity, and that moon over there is now sporting a rather fetching crater. I stared at the tactical display where the Ravager's scout ship had been. There was nothing there now except rapidly expanding debris, and what appeared to be a small tear in local space-time. Rodriguez, Murphy said calmly, please tell me you didn't accidentally create a localized reality distortion. Okay, I won't tell you that. But hypothetically, if I had accidentally created a localized reality distortion, it would probably stabilize in about 6 hours and definitely won't cause any permanent damage to the fabric of space-time in this sector. Murphy looked at me with an expression that suggested this was not the strangest Tuesday he'd experienced. Still think we're crazy for trying this? I watched the tactical display update as our sensors detected the main Ravager fleet beginning to emerge from hyperspace. 300 ships, just as our intelligence had predicted. Enough firepower to reduce our entire system to its component atoms. And 12 human ships were moving to intercept them, led by a captain who drank liquid chaos, an engineer who apparently rewrote physics as a hobby, and a tactical officer who found impossible odds personally entertaining.
Captain, I said, I'm beginning to think that maybe a little bit of crazy is exactly what this situation requires. The Ravager fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of mechanical locusts, their dark hulls blotting out the stars as they spread across our system in perfect formation. 300 ships, each one larger than our biggest space station, bristling with enough weaponry to crack moons and sporting the kind of armor that had turned entire civilizations into historical footnotes. I was monitoring communications from the main command center, surrounded by nervous Luminari technicians whose bioluminescent patches were flickering like broken emergency lights. The Ravager fleet commander's transmission came through in the universal trade language, delivered with the kind of casual arrogance that comes from never having met effective resistance. Attention, primitive inhabitants of this system. You have been selected for resource extraction and territorial acquisition. Surrender immediately and your deaths will be efficient. Resist, and they will be educational. You have 60 standard minutes to comply. Murphy, standing at the tactical display with his hands clasped behind his back, listened to the entire transmission with the expression of someone being offered a particularly uninteresting insurance policy. 60 minutes, he said, that's generous. Most bullies I've dealt with don't even give you time to write a will. He keyed the response channel. Ravager Fleet Commander, this is Captain Murphy of the Terran Defense Fleet. We've reviewed your terms and conditions, and we're going to have to respectfully decline. Also, your fleet formation has what our tactical computers are classifying as 17 critical weaknesses. Your flagship's reactor signature suggests maintenance issues. And frankly, your surrender demand could use some work on the intimidation factor. There was a pause. I imagine the Ravager commander wasn't used to having his genocide threats critiqued for style and substance. Unknown vessels, you appear to be suffering from a malfunction in your threat assessment systems. We are 300 vessels strong. You are 12. Basic mathematics suggests immediate surrender. Yeah, see, that's where you're wrong, Murphy replied, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining something to a particularly slow student. You're thinking like accountants. We're thinking like humans. Stone, initiate the Murphy Doctrine. Copy that. All ships, implement Tactical Plan Alamo. Repeat, this is not a drill, this is not a simulation, and this is definitely not going to be boring. I watched the tactical display as the human fleet spread out in what appeared to be a completely random pattern. No formation I recognized, no classical strategic positioning, just 12 ships scattered across space like someone had thrown dice and decided to call it a battle plan. Captain Murphy, I said, your fleet appears to be dispersing randomly. That's the beauty of it, Murphy said, grinning like someone who had just figured out the punchline to a cosmic joke. Every military academy in the galaxy teaches the same basic formation: wedge attacks, pincer movements, concentrated firepower doctrines. The Ravagers have probably conquered 100 species using textbook countermeasures to textbook strategies. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm from the engineering deck, all experimental weapons systems green and glowing ominously. Fair warning, some of these modifications haven't been tested under combat conditions, by which I mean they haven't been tested under any conditions, but where's the fun in playing it safe? The Ravager fleet began moving toward us in a classical domination formation, their massive dreadnoughts in the center, smaller vessels spread in perfect symmetrical wings. It was beautiful, precise, and exactly what you'd expect from a species that had been conquering the galaxy for centuries using superior numbers and overwhelming firepower. Stone, Murphy called out. What's their estimated time to weapons range? 14 minutes at current approach speed. They're taking their time,
probably expecting us to panic or make desperate mistakes. Perfect. That gives Rodriguez time to finish whatever she's doing down there that's making the station's lights flicker in colors that don't technically exist. That's when the first human ship, the Defiant Optimism herself, broke formation and accelerated directly toward the center of the Ravager fleet. Not angling for a tactical approach, not seeking cover, just a straight-line charge directly into the heart of 300 enemy vessels. "Murphy, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice probably reaching frequencies only certain species of space dolphins could hear. "Something unpredictable," he replied. "The thing about superior firepower is that it's only superior if you can bring it to bear effectively. Those big ships of theirs are designed to fight other big ships in orderly formations. They're not designed to deal with something small, fast, and absolutely butthouse crazy." The Ravager fleet responded exactly as Murphy had predicted. Their perfect formation began to collapse, as ships tried to target the single human vessel threading through their ranks like a caffeinated needle through galactic thread. Some turned to track the Defiant Optimism, others tried to maintain formation discipline, and several managed to get in each other's way. "Now that's what I call target fixation," Stone observed. "Classic tactical error. They're so focused on the obvious threat that they're ignoring everything else." Which is when the other 11 human ships opened fire. They'd used the Ravager's focus on Murphy's ship to get into optimal positions, and their first volley was a masterpiece of coordinated chaos. Not the overwhelming barrage you'd expect from desperate defenders, but precisely targeted strikes at specific points in the enemy formation. Shield generators, communication arrays, engine clusters, the kind of shots that don't destroy ships immediately, but turn organized fleets into confused collections of individual vessels. "Rodriguez," Murphy called out, still somehow maintaining his conversational tone, while flying through enemy crossfire that was turning local space into a lethal light show. "How's that special project coming along?" 30 seconds to firing solution. "Fair warning, the power requirements are going to drain every energy cell on the station, temporarily reverse the polarity of our artificial gravity, and possibly summon something from another dimension. The good news is, it should definitely get their attention." The Ravager commander's voice cut through our communications, no longer arrogant, definitely confused. "Human vessels, your tactics are unconventional. We are prepared to discuss terms." Murphy's laugh was audible across multiple star systems. "Terms? We haven't even started showing off yet. Rodriguez, light 'em up." What happened next violated several laws of physics, at least 3 interstellar treaties regarding experimental weapons, and possibly 1 or 2 fundamental constants of reality. The station shuddered. Every light went out for exactly 2 seconds, and when they came back on, a beam of energy that existed in colors I don't have names for, lanced out from our position, and struck the Ravager flagship. The beam didn't destroy the ship, that would have been too simple. Instead, it seemed to convince the ship's hull that it was actually made of a completely different material, one that was apparently allergic to existing in normal space-time. The flagship didn't explode so much as politely excuse itself from reality. "Rodriguez," I said, staring at the tactical display where the Ravager flagship used to be. "What exactly did you just do?" "I'm not entirely sure," came the cheerful reply. "I was trying to build a really big laser, but I think I accidentally created a localized physics revision instead. The good news is, it works. The bad news is, I have no idea how to turn it off, and it's charging up for another shot whether we want it to or not." The Ravager fleet, faced with the complete disappearance of their flagship and the prospect of facing weapons that apparently rewrote the rules of existence, did what any reasonable military force would do when confronted with opponents who had clearly abandoned the concept of fair play. They panicked. Ships began breaking formation, some trying to retreat, others attempting to concentrate fire on the human vessels. Still others apparently trying to figure out what had just happened to their command ship, and whether it might be contagious. The perfect discipline that had conquered countless worlds dissolved into chaos as individual captains made individual decisions about how to deal with an enemy that refused to follow any known tactical doctrine. "Stone," Murphy said, his ship now weaving through Ravager formations like a particularly aggressive dance partner. "Tactical assessment. They're confused, disorganized, and their command structure just got edited out of existence. Classic victory conditions, except for the part where we're still outnumbered 25-1, and Rodriguez's reality revision weapon is apparently beyond anyone's control." "Details," Murphy replied. "Rodriguez, how long until your contraption recharges?" "About 3 minutes. Also, I should probably mention that each shot seems to be making local space-time a little bit more flexible. We might want to wrap this up before the laws of physics file a formal complaint." That's when the Ravager reserve fleet dropped out of hyperspace behind us. Another 100 ships, fresh and undamaged, led by what appeared to be an even larger command vessel. The tactical display lit up with new threat indicators as I realized we'd been fighting the advance force, not the main fleet. "Well," Murphy said, his voice maintaining that infuriating calm as plasma bolts exploded around his ship. This just got interesting.
The arrival of the Ravager Reserve Fleet changed everything. What had been a chaotic but manageable engagement suddenly became a mathematical impossibility, even by human standards. 400 enemy vessels now filled our system, their combined firepower enough to sterilize entire sectors. I watched the tactical display update in real time as threat assessments climbed into numbers that our computers had to invent new categories for. The original Ravager fleet, despite their confusion, began to rally around the reserve force. New formations took shape, more disciplined, led by commanders who had clearly learned from watching their colleagues get systematically outmaneuvered by 12 humans with a death wish. "Stone," Murphy called out, his ship now dodging concentrated fire from 3 different battle groups. "Please tell me you've got some brilliant tactical insight that doesn't involve accepting our inevitable doom." "Working on it," Stone replied, his voice tight with concentration. "The reserve fleet commander is smart. He's not falling for the same chaos tactics. They're maintaining formation discipline and using their numbers advantage properly this time." That's when the first human ship died. The Perpetual Motion, a scrappy little corvette that had been dancing through Ravager formations for the past 20 minutes, took a direct hit from a dreadnought's main battery. There was no dramatic explosion, no heroic last transmission. One moment it was there, weaving between enemy vessels like a cosmic hummingbird, and the next moment it was an expanding cloud of superheated plasma and regret. "Damn," Murphy said quietly, and for the first time since this insanity began I heard something crack in his voice. That was Jenkins, and his crew. Good people. 2 more human ships followed in rapid succession. The Reasonable Doubt went down fighting, taking 3 Ravager destroyers with it in a maneuver that violated several principles of self-preservation. The aggressive negotiations lasted longer, its crew broadcasting increasingly creative insults over open channels until their communications went silent. "Captain," I said, my own voice barely steady, "perhaps it's time to consider withdrawal. You've done more than anyone could have asked. No one would think less of you for." "Kid," Murphy interrupted, his ship pulling impossible maneuvers to avoid a barrage that should have reduced it to constituent atoms. "Let me explain something about humans. We're not really bright enough to know when we're beat. It's one of our most endearing character flaws." Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos from the engineering deck. "Attention everyone not currently being shot at. The physics revision weapon is charged and ready for another shot. Bad news is, I'm detecting some concerning fluctuations in local space-time. We might want to consider whether shooting holes in reality is worth the tactical advantage." "How concerning?" Stone asked, somehow managing to coordinate fleet movements while his own ship performed what appeared to be interpretive dance with several Ravager interceptors. "Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is minor gravitational anomaly and 10 is accidentally creating a black hole, I'd say we're hovering around a 7 and climbing." The reserve fleet commander chose that moment to demonstrate why the Ravagers had conquered half the galaxy. Instead of the chaotic free-for-all his predecessor had fallen into, he began a methodical dissection of human positions. Concentrated firepower, coordinated movements, textbook tactics executed with the kind of precision that comes from centuries of successful conquest. 3 more human ships were forced into desperate evasive maneuvers, their formation cohesion breaking down under the sustained assault. The remaining vessels were being herded into a killing field, their options narrowing with each passing minute. "Murphy," Stone's voice carried a note I hadn't heard before. Something that might have been concern. "We're running out of maneuvering room. They've got us boxed in pretty effectively." "I noticed," Murphy replied, his ship now flying in patterns that seemed to defy several fundamental laws of motion. "Rodriguez, what's the status on our reality-bending party trick?" "Charged and ready, but Captain, I'm reading some seriously weird quantum fluctuation. I think each shot is making local space-time more unstable. Another blast might tear a permanent hole in the fabric of reality. And not the fun kind of hole, the kind that might accidentally invite something unpleasant from another dimension to come visit our nice, orderly universe." That's when I finally understood what I'd been witnessing for the past several hours. It wasn't tactical brilliance, though the humans certainly had that. It wasn't superior technology, despite Rodriguez's apparent ability to rewrite physics on demand. It wasn't even the unpredictability that had served them so well against the initial Ravager assault. It was something far more fundamental and far more terrifying. These humans weren't fighting because they thought they could win. They weren't fighting because they had a clever plan or superior resources, or some secret advantage. They were fighting because they had decided that this was the right thing to do, and they were prepared to keep doing it until they physically couldn't anymore. The Ravager fleet was fighting to conquer. The humans were fighting to exist. "Captain Murphy," I said, keying into the fleet communications. "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Why are you doing this?"
Your species barely knows us. We have no alliance, no treaty, no mutual defense agreement. Why are you dying for people you met 3 days ago? Murphy's ship took a hit that peeled away half its port armor plating. Emergency system screamed warnings across the comm channel, but his voice remained steady. You know what the universe taught us, Zephyr? It taught us that nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's going to swoop in at the last minute with a miracle solution. If something needs doing, you do it yourself, or it doesn't get done. Another human ship, the diplomatic immunity vanished in a ball of plasma fire. 7 vessels left. But we also learned something else. Murphy continued, his ship now streaming atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. We learned that sometimes, just sometimes, you can be the miracle someone else is waiting for. And maybe that's enough reason to try. The Ravager commander's voice cut across all frequencies, confident and final. Human vessels, you have fought with honor, but the mathematics are inexorable. Surrender now, and we will grant you quick deaths. Continue this futile resistance, and we will make examples that the galaxy will remember for millennia. Stone's tactical display showed the true scope of their situation. 7 human ships, most damaged, surrounded by nearly 400 enemy vessels in perfect formation. No escape routes, no tactical advantages, no possibility of victory by any rational measure. Murphy keyed the response channel, and when he spoke, his voice carried something I'd never heard from any other species in my years of diplomatic communications. It wasn't hope exactly, and it wasn't desperation. It was something that transcended both. Ravager Commander, this is Captain Jake Murphy of the Terran Defense Fleet. We've considered your terms, and we're going to have to respectfully decline. You see, there's something you don't understand about humans. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because fighting is what you do when someone threatens people who can't protect themselves. He paused, and I could hear the sound of hull stress and failing systems in the background. And there's one more thing you should know about my species. We're really bad at knowing when to quit. That's when Murphy did something that will probably be remembered in tactical academies for the next 1,000 years. Assuming anyone survives to build tactical academy, he turned the Defiant Optimism directly toward the Ravager Reserve flagship, and engaged his emergency overdrives. All remaining human vessels, he broadcast. This is Murphy, it's been an honor serving with you. Stone, take command of the fleet. Rodriguez, when I give the signal, fire everything we've got at my position. Don't argue, don't hesitate, and don't worry about collateral damage. Captain, Stone's voice was tight with something that might have been emotion. What are you planning? Murphy's ship accelerated toward the enemy flagship, dodging defensive fire with the desperate grace of someone who no longer cared about survival, only about making his death count for something. I'm planning to introduce these bastards to the most dangerous force in the known universe. He replied. A human being who's decided he's got nothing left to lose.
What happened next redefined my understanding of both physics and the human capacity for spite. Murphy's ship, the Defiant Optimism, streaked toward the Ravager flagship like a comet with anger management issues. The enemy vessel's defensive systems opened up with everything they had, filling space with enough concentrated firepower to level continents. Murphy flew through it all with the kind of precision that comes from decades of experience and the absolute certainty that you're about to die for something worthwhile. At exactly the right moment, when his ship was 3 seconds from impact with the enemy flagship, Murphy transmitted a single word. Now. Rodriguez fired her reality revision weapon. But instead of targeting the Ravager fleet, she aimed it at Murphy's ship. The beam struck the Defiant Optimism just as it collided with the enemy flagship, and the laws of physics threw up their hands in surrender. The explosion that followed wasn't just an explosion, it was a localized revision of several fundamental constants. A brief but emphatic suggestion to the universe that perhaps matter and energy might like to try being something else for a while. The Ravager flagship didn't just explode, it ceased. One moment it existed, and the next moment the space it had occupied contained nothing but an expanding sphere of what appeared to be crystallized time and several very confused quantum particles. The shockwave from the impact rippled through the Ravager fleet, and ships that had been perfectly organized seconds before suddenly found themselves dealing with gravity waves, temporal distortions, and the kind of electromagnetic pulse that makes hardened military electronics weep openly. But here's the thing about humans that I've learned. They plan for everything, including their own deaths. The remaining 6 human ships had used Murphy's sacrifice as cover to position themselves in what Stone calmly described as tactically advantageous positions for maximizing chaos in a disrupted enemy formation, which, translated from military speak, meant they'd gotten close enough to hurt things. What followed was less a battle and more a demonstration of what happens when a species that has spent 4,000 years perfecting the art of stubborn refuses to acknowledge that they're supposed to lose. The human ships, outnumbered 66-1, began picking apart the disrupted Ravager fleet with the methodical precision of craftsmen who had found their calling. They didn't try to engage in dramatic dogfights or heroic last stand. They just worked, efficiently and relentlessly, turning the Ravagers' numerical advantage into a liability as confused enemy ships got in each other's way and fired on their own formation. Stone, Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm, please tell me someone's recording this, because I'm pretty sure we're accidentally writing new chapters in several textbooks on applied impossibility. Already on it, Stone replied, his ship weaving through debris fields with the casual grace of someone threading a needle during an earthquake. Future historians are going to have fascinating debates about whether any of this actually happened. The Ravager Reserve Commander, faced with the complete breakdown of his carefully organized fleet, and the inexplicable disappearance of his flagship, made the kind of decision that military academies spend years teaching officers not to make. He panicked. His transmission went out on all frequencies, desperate and confused. All vessels, withdraw immediately. Repeat. All vessels withdraw. These humans are using weapons that violate fundamental laws of reality. Retreat to minimum safe distance and await reinforcement. That's when Commander Stone did something that perfectly captured the human approach to warfare. He laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a desperate laugh, but the genuinely amused chuckle of someone who had just heard something ridiculous. Ravager Fleet Commander, he broadcast. This is Commander Stone of the Terran Defense Fleet. Did you just say you're retreating because we're not fighting fair? There was a pause. Then, quietly, your weapons should not be possible. Yeah, we get that a lot. Here's the thing about humans. We've never been very good at accepting what should and shouldn't be possible. It's kind of our whole deal. And just like that, it was over. The Ravager fleet, 400 ships strong, began withdrawing from our system. Not in the organized retreat of a military force regrouping for another assault, but in the scattered flight of predators who had suddenly realized they were no longer at the top of the food chain. I watched them go from the command center, my bioluminescent patches flickering in patterns that my species uses to express profound confusion mixed with inappropriate amounts of relief. They're actually leaving, I said, not quite believing it. Of course they're leaving, Rodriguez replied, her voice tired but satisfied. Bullies are only dangerous until someone punches them in the nose. We just punched them in the nose with a localized revision of space-time. The aftermath was complicated. We'd won in the sense that our planet still existed, and the Ravagers were no longer trying to strip mine our solar system. But the cost had been severe. 7 human ships, and their crews had died fighting for people they'd never met, for a species they barely understood, because someone had asked for help and nobody else had bothered to show up. Stone's voice cut through my contemplation. Zephyr, we're going to need those communication arrays working at full capacity. Word of this is going to spread, and I suspect we're going to have a lot of very interesting conversations with various galactic powers over the next few weeks. He was right. Within days, our system was visited by diplomatic envoys from dozens of civilizations. The same species that had declined to help us were suddenly very interested in establishing mutual defense agreements and strategic partnerships with both the Luminari Coalition and the Terran Defense Fleet. The Zemthari Empire sent a delegation to discuss tactical cooperation. The Crystalline Confederacy expressed interest in philosophical exchanges regarding the nature of probability. Even the Void Collective submitted a formal application to study human approaches to problem solving. I handled most of these communications personally, and I'll admit I took a certain satisfaction in being politely unhelpful to civilizations that had been happy to let us face extinction alone. But the conversation that mattered most came 3 weeks later, when the human reinforcement fleet arrived. Real reinforcements this time, not the desperate volunteers who had answered our original distress call, but the official response from Earth Command. Admiral Sarah Martinez, the fleet commander, was everything you'd expect from someone who had to manage a species that treated impossible odds as personal challenges. Professional, competent, and possessed of the kind of patience that comes from dealing with subordinates who regularly violated the laws of physics. Captain Murphy's final report makes for interesting reading, she told me during our first meeting. He recommended that Earth Command establish a permanent defensive alliance with the Luminari Coalition, citing your species' strategic value and what he called impressive potential for thinking outside conventional limitations. Strategic value? I asked. She smiled. You asked for help when nobody else would. You stood with us when the odds were impossible. And according to Rodriguez's technical reports, your people have an intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics that makes our engineers weep with envy. From a strategic standpoint, that makes you exactly the kind of allies humanity needs. 3 months later, I was promoted to Chief Communications Officer for the newly established Human Luminari Defense Compact. My job involves coordinating responses to distress calls from across our galactic sector, and I'm pleased to report that we've never once declined to help when someone asks. We've also never lost a battle, not because we're militarily superior to every threat we face, but because humans have a gift for turning desperate situations into learning experiences for their opponents. Just last week,
We received a distress call from a mining colony being threatened by raiders. The human response fleet consisted of 3 ships, 2 engineers who treated physics as a suggestion rather than a law, and a tactical officer who had apparently written his dissertation on creative applications of spite in military strategy. The raiders are now questioning their career choice. Looking back on that day when the Ravagers came to end our civilization, I've realized that the universe didn't develop a sense of humor after all. It developed something far more dangerous. It developed humans. And honestly, I think that's worked out pretty well for the rest of